Boldwood presents Stalker, written by Gemma Rogers and read by Georgia Maguire. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Saturday, the 27th of January, 2018. I've never been in trouble before. Not the sort of trouble that brought me here. Freshly painted, stark white walls surround me. Their toxic scent lingers in the air. A fluorescent glow from strip lights so dazzling they must be there to desensitize the occupants. Everything is white or chrome, like I'm on the set of a futuristic movie. I swing my legs, which dangle over the edge of the bed, not quite reaching the floor. I do this for a minute to keep warm. Despite the blanket around my shoulders, I can't help but shiver. It's late and they didn't bring my jacket. I guess it's been taken away as evidence. The woman in front of me is standing too close, hot breath on my arm. It makes me squirm and I fight the urge to yank my hand away from her grip. She's holding it like I'm a china doll, fragile and easily broken. I dislike the invasion of my personal space. It's something I've learnt to tolerate over the years. I was never a big fan of being touched, shrinking away if someone brushed past me or stood too close on public transport. I'm not a hugger either. No one was in the house where I grew up. After tonight, I can't imagine I'll let anyone touch me again. Her name is Dr. Joyce Hargreaves, she told me as we entered the victim examination room. Her job, she said, was to collect evidence from me, which is why she was wearing a paper suit, so there wouldn't be any cross-contamination. She hasn't picked up on my anxiety, the tremor in my fingers. She's too busy. Brows furrowed, eyes focused, as she peels the plastic bag away from my bloodied hand to collect scrapings from my skin and beneath my fingernails. The tool she uses makes me nervous. Is that a scalpel? My voice barely a whisper. No, it's a scraper. Don't worry, it won't hurt. This is just so I can make sure we collect any skin cells that may be buried underneath the tips of your nails. I'm afraid I'll have to give them a trim in a minute, too. She wields the scraper with care, and it's true, it doesn't hurt. Physically, I'm okay, except my throat is on fire and the ringing in my ears is deafening, timed perfectly with the throbbing of my face. I have a feeling I might feel worse once the adrenaline leaves my system. When she finishes with my hands, she pulls the fallen blanket back over my shoulders and offers a kind smile as she pushes her glasses up her nose. I can see strands of greying hair trying to escape by her ear, exposed beneath the coverall hat. She wears no jewellery and her face is free of makeup. Was she on duty, or has she been called out of her bed to attend to me? Would we recognise each other in different circumstances? Probably not. I must be one of many people that pass through this room every day. Joyce delicately inserts each of the specimens into small tubes before labelling them to be sent for analysis. I don't know why. I've told them what happened. Soon she'll want to examine me thoroughly, internally, until there are no more swabs left to be taken. She glances at me, knowing what's coming, what she must ask me to do. Her eyes are full of pity. I must look a mess. Dried blood on my face and chest is beginning to flake away, like charred skin falling into my lap. My cheek is puffy, and the vision poor on my left side. I wish I could stop shivering. They said it's shock and provided me with a mug of hot, sweet tea after the ambulance checked me over. They wanted to make sure the blood I am doused in isn't mine. It isn't. Chapter 2. Sunday, the 24th of September, 2017. The attack lasted just 7 life-changing minutes. the same amount of time it took the tattooist to ink my skin earlier this year, or the minutes I've spent in a supercharged sunbed. It was strange how the same amount of time could feel so different. I was no longer someone who thought bad things happened to other people. How many times had I walked home from clubs alone in the early hours of the morning, still buzzing from the evening's events, oblivious to my surroundings, too desperate to climb into bed to stand in line for a taxi. Those were the nights I made it to my destination unharmed. I never realised how lucky I was. The plan was to catch the 8:55 a.m. train from Carshalton to London Victoria, which would get me in to meet my oldest friend, Jane, at 9:30 a.m. outside W.H. Smith's. We'd been to high school together, bonded over our mutual love of Eminem, and stayed friends ever since. Work had been crazy for both of us, and it had been a month since I'd seen her last. As a nurse, she'd been doing loads of overtime at St George's Hospital in Tooting, saving as much money as she could to go travelling next year. We'd planned a joint birthday celebration. My 25th had passed in August, and hers was coming up in mid-October. I'd booked tickets for the London Eye at 10:30, which is why we were keen to meet up early. Wasn't far to go, tube up to Green Park and then back down to Waterloo. I'd been once before with my ex-boyfriend Dean, but it was Jane's first time. As soon as I'd told her about the amazing views across the city, she'd been desperate to book a flight. We'd chosen to have lunch afterwards at the Rainforest Cafe at Piccadilly Circus, which looked exotic and fun. Choosing the restaurant took up most of our half-an-hour phone call as we discussed our plans for the day. I'd been looking forward to our trip all week, but had slept through my alarm, so was in a rush to get to the station, a 20-minute walk away. It was becoming a bit of a habit that I'd lie awake at night worrying about things, usually about how I was going to pay the bills. I'd end up watching the sunrise before passing out and waking in a panic. Thankfully, I'd chosen my outfit the night before, so after my 5-minute shower, I threw on a white and orange striped shirt with jeans and headed out of the door. It was going to be a beautiful day for our flight. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I cut through Grove Park, passing a dog walker on my way in. An old boy with a white and tan terrier who tipped his cap at me and smiled. They both seemed to be enjoying their early morning stroll around the park. All was peaceful. The Sunday bustle didn't normally start until around 9:30. It was usually my favourite time of day for a jog, before everyone else stirred from their lazy mornings. Digging my headphones out of my bag, I selected a playlist on my phone and headed across the field. It was a large expanse of open space, where children's football matches were played on Saturday mornings. 2 rusty goalposts adorned each end of the pitch. Black crows gathered at the centre spot, feasting on what looked like a leftover kebab. To the left of the field stood a children's playground, fenced in, with brightly coloured swings and slides. On the right was a small yellow cafe with a mini crazy golf course at the front. The exit to the park was at the far end, 2 streets away from the station, shaving around 5 minutes off my journey. I felt buoyant. The sun shone overhead, and above the volume of Bastille's Pompeii, I could hear the birds chirping in the surrounding trees. As I neared the cafe, I could see its grey anti-vandalism shutters were down, covered in tags of local graffiti artists. A sign on the front indicated it didn't open until 10 a.m. I checked my watch. It was 8:35 a.m. Bugger, I'd hoped to grab a coffee for my journey, as I'd missed breakfast. Gravel underfoot shifted behind me, but before I could turn, I was slammed into the wall of the cafe. Stunned, I twisted my head and caught a glimpse of a black wool balaclava and a flash of ice-blue eyes over my shoulder. Cold and emotionless. My breath caught in my throat, and my limbs froze. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. Pressed up against the yellow faded bricks, unable to move. The only sound I could hear was my heart beating in my ears. A small, sharp penknife waved in front of my eyes, reflected the morning sun, and blinded me momentarily. "Scream and I'll cut you," he whispered, just behind my ear, his breath rippling strands of my hair. A sweet citrus smell mixed with coffee emanated from him. His voice was unnerving, soft and non-threatening, yet in complete control. He gripped my shoulder and shoved me a few steps to the rear of the cafe. I resisted, legs rigid, stumbling over the contents of my bag which had spilled out onto the ground during the scuffle. The designer purse Jane bought me last birthday lay amongst the dirt. It registered with me that money wasn't what he'd come for, and a feeling of dread seeped into my body. Behind the building was a narrow concrete walkway, hidden in the shadows and shielded from the view of the field and path ahead. The back door to the building was old, its green paint flaking off, a tiny padlock entrusted with keeping thieves out. Next to it was a large black-lidded industrial bin, surrounded by cigarette ends. It smelt of chips and oil, and attracted the flies. Terrified to look back, but the fear of not knowing greater, I swiveled my head, getting another glimpse of his face. I couldn't see much, the majority covered with the balaclava, his lip turned up into a snarl. Hostile, close-set eyes stared at me with an emptiness that made my blood run cold. A flash of anger passed across them before he smashed my face back to the wall, scraping my cheek. I let out a whimper. A metallic taste pooled in my mouth. He dragged me over to the bin, pressing his body against mine, using his weight to keep me still. His right hand resting on the lid, the knife on display. A silent warning to comply. I could hear him panting and felt the length of his erection pushed against me. Adrenaline and panic coursed through my system, and the thud in my chest hammered my ribcage like it wanted out. My eyes began to well. "Please don't," I wailed, trying to work up the courage to scream, but he pushed against me harder, enjoying the power. "I know you want it." My legs crumpled like they no longer belonged to me. My eyes strayed to the ground. He wore plain black trainers and jogging bottoms gathered at the ankle. I prayed someone would walk past or a dog would find us, sniff us out and raise the alarm. My right arm was wrenched behind my back, almost pulling my shoulder out of its socket. Pushing his cock into my hand, he forced my fingers to wrap around it. My stomach plummeted to the floor, and I fought the urge to urinate. His erection felt strange in my palm, not natural. Was he wearing a condom? In a split second, I chose to be compliant. I was too frightened to scream or fight. I just wanted to live through whatever was happening to me. Tears ran down my cheeks as he groaned in satisfaction, moving my hand back and forth to pleasure himself until I'd got the rhythm. I could feel my throat closing up, the bile rising. Eyes focused on the brickwork, anywhere but my hand. Suddenly he'd had enough foreplay, and strong arms reached around my waist to the front of my jeans, where fingers fumbled to pull open my button and zip before he wrenched them down my thighs. "Be a good girl," he panted, the knife inches from my eye. I swallowed hard and managed a strange squeak of submission. The cold realization of what lay ahead dawning on me, powerless to stop it. "No, please," I begged. Grabbing my hair, he forced me down, over the top of the bin, the lid compressing my chest, and kicked my feet as far apart as my jeans would allow. I felt the rip of my knickers and tried to cry out, but no sound came. He groaned as his gloved hand thrust between my legs, exposing my vulva. He spat on his hand and wiped himself before roughly pushing his erection inside me, penetrating my core. The sudden burning sensation from below was excruciating, firing all my senses and nerves to red alert. Biting on my hand, I squeezed my eyes tight as warm urine dribbled down my legs. Violated in the worst possible way. I focused on the rhythmic shuffle of the bin across the concrete ground, inching forward with every thrust as my hip bones slammed remorselessly into it. The intensity of his rhythm grew, each thrust getting harder and deeper, skin slapping against skin. My breath being sucked and pushed out of me. As his grunting pitched higher, he pulled on my hair, snapping my head back, and with one final thrust, his body went rigid. Finally, his body slackened with the release, and then his weight lifted. My ribs felt crushed. I was sure the imprint of the bin would be visible on my chest. Seconds later, I heard the elastic of his waistband snap back into place. Leaning over, he used the thumb of his gloved hand, still wielding the knife, to stroke my cheek. My stomach heaved at the intimacy. He just violated me, yet he touched my face like we were a couple in love. "You are perfect," he whispered, his breathing laboured. I tasted bile and fought hard not to vomit. I remained, splayed out over the bin, exposed to the elements like a rag doll, too distraught at what had just taken place to move. In that moment, I just wanted to curl up and die. Seconds stretched out in front of me. I could hear no background noise at all. It was deathly quiet. I waited for something, a fist or a blade slicing my skin, something to end my ordeal. But it never came. Was it over? A hollow silence filled the gap. I hesitated, unsure what to do. After what seemed like the longest time, my legs gave way and I slid to the floor, daring to turn around, to face what was coming. When I did, the space was empty. He was gone. Chapter 3. Sunday the 28th of January, 2018. I've been moved to a cell. Names of former occupants and unimaginative insults have been scratched into the walls. It's a waiting room, a holding pen. There's a weird odour, a combination of piss and bleach, irritating my throat. I've been processed through the system and all evidence stripped from my body. Clothes were peeled away and dropped onto the sheet on which I stood to catch every fibre, every hair, every skin cell. Before moving to a shower, where they collected the diluted blood that ran off my skin. Photos were taken of my injuries, then fingerprints and a saliva swab, before I got my phone call. The paper suit I've been given to replace my clothes does little to ward off the chill in the air, although they let me keep the blanket. The suit crackles when I move, so I'm trying to remain still. I like the quiet. Minutes feel like hours. The bench is hard and my backside numb. I can add it to my list of complaints. My left eye is almost swollen shut now and my cheekbone feels like it's pulsating, a constant internal thud like the bang of a drum. I'm glad I took my contact lenses out before it got too painful to touch. I got rid of them before the ambulance arrived. It's impossible to get comfortable. My neck hurts in every position I try, the bruised skin tender. I curl my legs against my chest, with my chin on my knees, trying to keep the warmth in. I'm being watched. There's a camera in the corner of the ceiling, and I lower my head for a while so my face is out of view. There's no chance of sleep. Not with fluorescent lights flickering and the noise. Shouting radiates through the walls. The custody suite is busy tonight, as I guess they are every weekend. The drunk and disorderly, the domestics and assaults. I hear the banging of metal on metal and the constant clicking of viewing hatches. I need to stay calm. If I tell the truth, I'll be fine. A part of the truth, anyway. It must be about 2 a.m. by now. My eyes are stinging. Tears blur my vision, but I let them come. I am the victim here. They'll want to speak to me soon, make me go through the events of tonight. I don't think they quite know what to do with me yet, but we'll see how switched on they are. I'm not going to make it easy for them. How long will it be before someone connects the dots? Sunday the 24th of September, 2017. I tried to stand, but my knees gave way, and I hit the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Pulling myself up on the handle of the back door of the cafe, I gingerly edged my jeans up my legs, repositioning my knickers that were almost torn in two. Legs damp with urine, but not obvious on the dark denim. My striped shirt, dirty and torn at the shoulder. A couple of buttons had come undone, and my fingers fumbled to do them up, covering my bra. I felt bruised and sore, the denim crotch grating my skin with each step. Everything moved in slow motion as I made my way around the side of the cafe to find my bag on the ground, untouched. I gathered my purse, phone, and other items, stuffing them inside before stumbling back across the field, the way I'd come no more than 10 minutes before. My attacker nowhere to be seen. The park empty. The only noise a squawking of the crows still devouring their breakfast. It was surreal, like I'd had too much to drink. In my head, I wanted to run as fast as I could, get away, but my limbs wouldn't respond. They moved sluggishly across the field and back to the road. I drifted out onto the residential street. A couple of cars drove past, and a woman across the road trotted along. She looked as though she'd been to the petrol station for milk, her blue carrier bag swinging at her side. I stopped and stared at her, hoping she would notice me, see the tears streaming down my cheeks, blurring my vision, but she didn't even turn. Over my left shoulder, I caught a man with a Springer Spaniel slipping into the park. He passed without so much as a second glance. I wanted to scream, "Where the fuck were you when I needed you?" The injustice of it burned in the pit of my stomach. It was all so normal out here. I'd been violated just feet away, and the world hadn't stopped. Everyone just carried on. Clinging to a lamppost, I vomited bile on the curb. I couldn't think straight. Where could I go? What should I do? I stumbled towards home in a daze. The 10-minute journey seemed to take forever, and no one stopped to ask if I was all right. I unlocked the door to my flat and fell across the threshold. The relief was overwhelming. Pulling myself up to double-lock the door, I was finally safe. Across the hall was the bedroom of my lodger, Ben. I knocked on it. When he didn't answer straight away, I banged until the door flew open. He stood there in tattered football shorts, yawning. "Oh, what the fuck, Eve?" Rubbing his eyes, he hitched up his waistband, sitting precariously low on his hips, before focusing on my face. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you? Are you hurt? Your face!" I couldn't speak of it. Not yet. He looked me up and down. The front of my shirt blackened from the bin, a gaping hole at the shoulder. Face tear-stained and bloody. I must have looked a fright. "Can I have a joint?" I mumbled. Ben smoked pot occasionally, medicinally, according to him. He'd dislocated his knee a couple of years ago playing football, and every now and then it would get inflamed. Apparently, it was better than any ibuprofen you could buy over the counter for soothing the flare-ups. He disappeared into his dark room. A musty smell emanated from within, and I stepped back. My stomach threatened to heave, but then he was back at the door, handing me a perfectly rolled joint. I was relieved. I wouldn't have had the first clue how to roll one. "Can I get you anything? Do you want me to call someone?" he asked. "I just need to be alone," I mumbled, unable to look him in the eyes. Ben nodded, his face full of concern, as he watched me head into the bathroom. I had to remove every trace of him from me. I filled the bath and double-checked the door was locked before peeling away my clothes, discarding the pile in the corner behind the washing basket. They weren't to be washed, they were to be burnt, forever tainted. Blood spotted the crotch of my jeans, and I sobbed, unable to tear my eyes away. The water was as hot as I could stand it. Lowering into the heat, the stinging from below making me wince, I scrubbed until my skin was raw, erasing every trace of him. But no matter how hard I scoured, the soiled feeling remained. I flinched as water splashed my face. I'd forgotten about my cheek. Grabbing Ben's shaving mirror from the sink, I inspected the damage. My cheek was crusted with dried blood and dirt, tinged yellow from the painted bricks. It hurt like hell, but was only a graze. I dabbed at the wound with a flannel until it appeared cleaner and lay submerged as the water grew tepid. I could hear my phone ringing inside my bag, for the 4th time. It had to be Jane, wondering where I was. She'd be waiting at the station for me, confused as to why I hadn't arrived. I needed to answer her. I climbed out of the bath and took my bag into my bedroom. Leaving my towel on the floor, I shuffled into my pyjamas. The familiar smell of washing powder comforting. Unable to stop shivering, I wrapped my duvet around myself. Digging my phone out of my bag and brushing off the debris, I saw I had 8 missed calls and 2 texts, all from Jane. I sent her a message. "Have to cancel. Attacked on the way to the station. Can't talk now. We'll ring later. Kiss." 20 seconds later, my phone was ringing persistently again. Jane would have read that and be in a panic, but I couldn't talk about it. Not yet. I lit the joint Ben had given me and inhaled, coughing it out. I never smoked pot, but I wanted to be out of it. I couldn't deal with what had happened. I held the smoke in so the buzz came fast and let myself drift into oblivion. I needed to feel numb. I smoked half, staring at my book collection in a jumble on the floor. Colours and titles blurred into each other. I must get some shelves. Who was I kidding? I barely knew one end of a drill from the other. I lay down and switched off my phone. I wanted to drift away and forget it all. I knew I had to call the police, report there was a sexual predator on the loose, but they would have to wait. The balaclava crept into my dream. His soulless eyes penetrated me, lip curled into a smirk, mocking my terror. When I woke, there were a few blissful seconds of ignorance until my cheek throbbed and the memory of this morning crashed in. The room was dim. What time was it? Had I slept all day? My stomach groaned. I'd not eaten since yesterday. All was quiet. Ben must have already left for work. His job as a security manager involved working 12-hour shifts on rotation, often at the weekend. I went into the kitchen, surprised to see the time on the oven. It was 7 in the evening. I prayed there would be milk in the fridge. I badly needed a cup of tea. My lips were beginning to crack. The smell of food hung in the air, making me salivate. Ben had cooked. I peeked in the microwave and saw he'd left me a bowl inside with a note. "Call me." He was the best. Pesto pasta, a little congealed, but I was so hungry I'd eat anything. I wolfed it down and the hunger pains subsided. Normally I was the tidy one out of the two of us, but I left my plate in the sink. Ben wouldn't mind. Not today. I scribbled thanks in large capital letters on the note before making tea and returning to the sanctuary of my room. Safe and warm in there, cocooned in my duvet, I smoked the rest of the joint, knowing it would help me sleep some more. What would I do tomorrow? There was no way I was going to the office. I worked as an assistant in a small marketing department of a distribution company called Drive. It was my job to organise photo shoots and write press releases. I enjoyed it, especially the creativity it allowed, but the thought of going into work filled me with dread. I could ask Ben to ring in for me in the morning, but it would mean I'd have to tell him what had happened, and I wasn't sure I could. I knew I had to tell the police. If he attacked someone else, I'd never forgive myself. Chapter 4. Sunday, the 28th of January, 2018. When they come to take me to interview, I've lost all sense of time. How long has it been since I was cautioned? A portly sergeant had stood at the front desk and held my forearm as he spoke. He had a lisp, and spittle flew from his mouth as he struggled to enunciate each word. I averted my eyes to the clock behind the desk, which read 1:05 a.m. Rose Harding, I am arresting you on suspicion of grievous bodily harm. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. He looked me over, his mouth pulled into a grimace. My slight frame, my eye, the bruises. I know I look weak. It's going to be my advantage. Before I was taken to the custody suite, I was offered legal representation, and within 20 minutes, a skinny man with wire-rimmed glasses and a bald head knocks on the heavy door. He's let in, introduces himself as Terry Deacon, and asks me to run through the events of last night. As I tell him, he barely glances in my direction. There's no flicker of emotion as I explain what I've been through. No doubt he's heard it all before. I'm just another legal aid case, a tick in the box. He flicks through a file of papers and advises me to respond no comment to all questions. We sit in the interview room and the detective switches the recorder on. He's heavy-set, I would guess in his late 50s, with unkempt ash-blonde hair, and looks like he's just rolled out of bed. Shirt crumpled, with a tie sat clumsily to the left. Someone should tell him. I'm surprised his colleague hasn't. A female detective sits beside him. She looks to be in her late 30s and, in stark contrast, is immaculately presented. Her crisp blouse collar, ice-white and starched, is standing to attention. Chestnut hair pulled back into a tight bun, stiff with hairspray. I sense she has something to prove. She smiles at me, and when she does, her face softens as she slides the coffee I was offered across the table. I need it to stay awake now the adrenaline has left my system. Right, Rose, I think we're ready to start. The male detective clears his throat and announces the date and time, occupants of the room. He is Detective Gary Hicks and she is Detective Sarah Becker, as well as stating the recording is taking place at Sutton Police Station. Call me Eve, I say. No one calls me Rose now, not since my father died. Hicks nods his head. Eve, I'm afraid there have been some developments since you were brought to the station. Unfortunately, Mr. Shaw has died as a result of his injuries, so we have to rearrest you on a different charge. Do you understand? I hang my head. I don't want my eyes to betray me, so I nod. For the purpose of the recording, Eve has nodded her head, Becca says. She lays a cold hand upon my wrist. I flinch but meet her gaze. Her eyes flash a glimpse of compassion, and mine brim with tears on cue. I'm read my rights for the second time. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. And so, it begins. Monday, the 25th of September, 2017. The police tapped so lightly on the front door I didn't hear them at first. Floorboards creaking on the landing outside caught my attention, and my skin prickled. Opening the door a crack, I saw the uniform and my shoulders relaxed. It was early in the morning, around 7. I'd tossed and turned all night, images of him invading my thoughts. Was he getting ready to go out and find another victim? My conscience berated me for not reporting it yesterday. Eventually I gave in and made the call to the police. They arrived within the hour, and 2 female officers sat at the kitchen table drinking tea. One of the officers, a redhead with freckles, wore the uniform. The other, with blonde shoulder-length hair, was higher ranking and wore a smart navy trouser suit. I sat opposite them, smoking one of Ben's cigarettes from a packet left on the kitchen table. Trembling hands betrayed my composure. I didn't want to relive it all over again, but made sure my voice remained steady as I recalled the events of yesterday morning, explaining I had been raped on my way to the train station. They both took notes, showing concern but maintaining their professionalism. The uniformed officer looked like she was trying to capture my words in their entirety. Her hand flew across the page like lightning, seizing every detail. "Is there anyone we can call for you?" I shook my head. I didn't want my mother to know. She wouldn't be any help, over 100 miles away, and there was no point in upsetting her. She was in a fragile state most of the time when she was sober anyway. She and my father had moved to Norfolk to retire 5 years ago, giving me the deposit for the flat and helping to arrange the mortgage before they left. I think they felt guilty, leaving me behind on my own, no siblings to rely on, but I didn't want to go with them. Leave my job and my friends to move to a new town and start all over again. They'd barely been there a year when my dad had a heart attack and died. Mum turned to alcohol to cope. I tried to get her to come back, to move in with me, but she didn't want to leave the home she shared with Dad, however briefly. "Would you be able to give us the clothes you were wearing yesterday?" the uniformed officer asked, slipping on latex gloves and placing a clear plastic bag on the table. I retrieved the clothes from the bathroom, where they remained untouched, and placed them inside the bag she held open. "You've not washed them?" I shook my head. It sickened me to touch them. The sight repulsed me, which was infuriating as they were my favourite pair of jeans. I could never wear them again. "Great, thank you. Now, would you be able to come into the station? We have an examination suite there. I can get a doctor to look you over, collect any evidence the perpetrator may have left behind. It can be vital when securing a conviction." "I've had a bath," I admitted. The blonde's face betrayed a flicker of disappointment. "Well, it's worth a try. Do you think you would be able to show us where it took place?" My chest tightened. I never wanted to go back there again. The front door opened, and seconds later, Ben walked into the kitchen, no doubt hearing unusual voices and wanting to investigate. He came to an abrupt halt in the doorway when he saw the uniform, and blood drained from his face. "My flatmate Ben," I said, by way of an introduction. They stood from the table, and I followed. "Eve, do you want to get your bag and coat?" the detective asked, and I obediently collected them from my room. "She won't be long, just going to pop to the station." "Do you want me to pick you up?" Ben asked. I looked first at him and then the detective. "No, it's fine. We'll drop her back." "You look after her, Ben," the uniformed officer continued, sizing him up. It was more of a command than a request. Of course," Ben stammered, and stood aside to let them pass, pulling on his ear. They ushered me out of the door and down to the car. I sat in the back, listening to the women to discuss where to go first. It was decided the park, and my stomach churned the closer we got. Walking through the entrance and across the field made me feel sick. My entire body shook, the jacket I'd brought doing little to keep me warm. Every muscle tensed as I neared the spot. I wanted to run away. When we reached the cafe, it was business as usual. A group of children came bouncing out of the door, each clutching a Mr. Whippy ice cream. Too innocent for this place. I looked around, searching every face. Was he here, enjoying watching me relive the nightmare? I pointed to the rear of the building, not willing to go round the back and see where it had happened. It was already burnt into my memory. Images I would never erase. Detective Sergeant Emerson, who gave me her card whilst we were in the car, took notes on a pocket-sized pad and indicated for the uniformed officer to radio for the scenes of crime officers. Then she left me outside whilst she talked to the cafe owners about closing for the day. The look of horror on the face of the plump woman in an apron made my eyes well up, and I had to turn away. Within minutes, more officers arrived and were cordoning off the area. I was taken back to the car. The police station wasn't far. Inside the entrance was a short corridor with a thick metal door at the end. The front desk was to the right, cased in protective glass. It smelt stale and musty. As soon as we arrived, I was escorted into the rape suite. A female doctor, who looked too young to be practicing, explained that she would take samples of my saliva, urine, blood and pubic hair to keep as evidence, and in the hope any DNA could be found. Her voice apologetic as she told me vaginal and rectal swabs would also need to be taken. As she moved through the process, I felt numb, only wincing when she got to the internal examination and collection. "I'm so sorry, I know it's uncomfortable. I'll try and be as quick as I can," she said gently, as all my muscles tensed, and I fought the urge to snap my legs shut. Unable to conceal the tears streaming down my cheeks, I looked away at the wall and bit the inside of my cheek until it bled. Once I was fully dressed, I sat at her desk as she wrote up my notes. The doctor gave me emergency contraception to take and advised me to get tested for STDs as soon as possible. "I'm sure he wore a condom," I mumbled. "Better safe than sorry," she replied as she wrote up my notes. Exhausted, I wanted to go home, but I had to give my statement first. I was escorted to an interview room where Detective Emerson waited. "Thank you for your time this morning, Eve. I imagine it's not been easy. Can I get you anything to drink before we start?" "No, thank you." I wrapped my arms around myself. "Okay, ready to start?" I nodded. "How would you describe your attacker?" He was taller than me, around 5'7", I think. I didn't see his face. "How old do you think he was?" "I don't know, mid to late 20s, maybe even 30, I can't be sure." "What colour was his skin?" "White." "Hair colour?" "I don't know, I didn't see." "Did you see any hair at all on his arms or legs? Eyebrows?" "No, he had long sleeves. I'm not sure if it was a hoodie or a sweatshirt, and he wore jogging bottoms. He also had gloves and a balaclava on." "What colour were they? Any distinguishing marks or logos?" My thoughts turned to those plain trainers. "No, none that I could see. Everything was black." "Did you see his eyes? What colour were they?" I recoiled. His eyes would haunt me forever. Ice blue, cold and empty, devoid of any emotion. They were blue. "Okay, tell me what he said to you. What did he sound like? Any accents?" I told Emerson about the soft voice, how it was more intimidating than if he had shouted. "Fantastic, Eve. You're doing great. I know you've already told me this morning, but can you tell me again exactly what happened yesterday from when you stepped into the park?" After reliving it again for the second time, Detective Emerson dropped me back at home, walking me up to my front door and seeing me safely inside. Well done. I know it's been traumatic and you've been incredibly brave. If you remember anything else, please don't hesitate to call. You have my card. I'll be in touch in a few days. I shut the door and my shoulders sagged, relieved it was over. I wanted a shower, but contemplated going back to bed instead. Hearing the front door, Ben came out of his room. Are you okay? I gave him a weak smile. I'm tired. Tea? He asked, and I nodded. A few minutes later, we both sat at the table, tea in one hand, cigarette in the other. An awkward silence between us. I hadn't smoked for a few years, and I didn't want to start again now, but it was a slippery slope. I enjoyed the stress relief it brought, and Ben was only too happy to share. Fuck! I hadn't called in sick for work yet. It was 9:30. They'd be wondering where I was. What? Ben said, alarmed at my sudden outburst. Nothing. I've got to ring the office and tell them I won't be in. Do you want to tell me what happened? No, but I had to at some point. Perhaps if I said it fast, it would be easier. Like ripping off a plaster. I was raped on the way to the station yesterday morning. Ben's mouth dropped open, and the horrified expression on his face made my eyes fill with tears. He reached across the table and laid his hand on top of mine. I'm so sorry, Eve. That's fucking awful. I grimaced. Yes, it was. Hopefully they'll catch him quickly. They've got his DNA, right? I nodded, although I wasn't sure, now regretting the bath in the cold light of day. Hopefully there'd be some of him left on my clothes. Chapter 5. Sunday the 28th of January, 2018. But he attacked me. He tried to kill me, I cry out, cradling my head in my hands. Tears pool on the desk beneath me and my legs tremble beneath the table. Terry taps my arm and I flinch away. He ignores my reaction and leans in to whisper, I advised no comment. Why can't I talk? I haven't done anything wrong, I hiss back. Let's start with how you met Ian. Hicks leans back in his seat, waiting for me to speak. Relax. I can do this. I don't even have to lie. It's more bending the truth. I sip my coffee, use the seconds to gather my thoughts and wipe my eyes on the blanket. The stage is set. We met at the gym, Pulse, in town. I signed up a few months ago. It was an offer, 12 months for the price of 10. Okay, so Ian attended the same gym? The continuous use of his name makes me twitch. Sounds so normal, not fitting for the monster he was. Yes, we went at similar times, so we'd smile and say hello. He was one of the regulars. When did you first speak to each other? I think it was about 2 months ago. He was waiting for a weights machine to come free, and we chatted at the water fountain. I sniff, and Hicks pushes the tissue box towards me. I can't work out if he's being polite or just irritated by my sniffling. I hope it's the latter, but I take the tissue and blow my nose. What did he say? Do you remember? Becca leans forward in her seat, taking notes in a spiral-bound book. Hicks has his arms crossed, staring at me intently. I feel a flush rise in my neck. Just hello? He joked about the machines always being full, I think. He seemed friendly, normal. Did you get the impression he liked you? Hicks asks, his forehead wrinkling. I guess so. Didn't think much of it at the time. He used to watch me run. Made me feel embarrassed. Becca nods. Did you think he was creepy? No, not then. Not at all, really. Not until last night. I let out a sob, and Hicks looks like he'd rather be anywhere else than here. He was clawing at my clothes, like an animal. I'm weeping again, and I know I'll have a headache before long. The detectives glance at each other, but I can't read them. Perplexed, maybe? Sympathetic? I'm not sure yet. I just want to go home, I wail. It's true. I'm shattered and want a long bath. I want to hibernate for at least a week, but there's no way that's going to happen yet. I have to try and get out of here today. Monday, the 25th of September, 2017. Ben headed off to bed, and I stared at my phone. I couldn't face talking to my boss, Stuart. It was difficult enough to say, and, ridiculously, I felt embarrassed having to say it to a man. I'd go direct to human resources. Debbie was the closest person to me at work. After a few rings, she answered, sounding puffed out with a cheery, "Hello?" She must have ran to grab the phone. "Hi, Debbie. It's Eve," I said, my voice already cracking. Tears erupted from nowhere, and I had to stop myself hanging up. The kitchen walls seemed to shrink in around me. I'd never felt so drained. "Eve, are you all right?" Debbie and I had hit it off when I joined the company. Before I gave up smoking, we would congregate at the bus stop outside the office at least 4 times a day. She was nice, in her mid-30s, and married with kids, but too much of a gossip to be working in HR. As friendly as we were, I knew my story would be all over the building in minutes, but I had no choice. "No, I'm not, to be honest. I need a few days off." "What's happened?" "I don't want to go into detail, but..." I struggled to say it out loud. "I was sexually assaulted yesterday. I've just got back from the police station and I don't feel up to coming in." My voice wobbled as I tried to fight back the tears, sniffing loudly. "Of course. Oh my goodness, you poor girl. That's terrible. Don't even think about coming in. Take as long as you need. I'll have a discreet word with Stuart and you get in touch when you're ready to come back." The genuine concern in her voice was comforting. Every time I said it out loud, to another person, made it more real. My limbs felt weak and all energy zapped. "Is there anything at all we can do?" "No, thank you, Debbie." "Okay, well, we're here if you need us. Keep in touch." "Thanks. I better go," I said, hanging up. I put my head in my hands and wept. The flat was quiet. I couldn't even hear Ben snoring. Made me feel uneasy, the silence, even though I knew I wasn't on my own. All the doors were locked and no one could get in. Just as I changed into my pyjamas to get into bed, a knock came at the front door. I wrapped myself up in my dressing gown and hesitated by Ben's door. Should I wake him up to answer it? I tiptoed towards the door, but before I got to it, I heard Jane's voice. "Eve, it's me!" I flung open the door and began to sob as soon as I saw her face, overwhelmed by how glad I was to see my closest friend. Jane had on denim dungarees, a neon cropped t-shirt beneath, allowing a glimpse of her tiny midriff, and plimsolls, her golden hair long and loose. She practically carried me to my room and we huddled on my bed. "I've been so worried. You never called. I've been ringing and ringing." I glanced at my phone, redundant on my carpet. I'd set it to silent after I rang Debbie, ignoring the notifications of texts and missed calls. "I'm sorry." "Oh, Eve." I cried into her shoulder as she held my hand. She asked nothing of me, and for that I was grateful. I fell asleep and woke up with my head in her lap as she gently stroked my hair. I sat up, wiping sleep from my eyes. "Have you taken the day off work?" I asked. "Called in sick?" Her eyes wide, a guilty grin. I smiled. Jane always made me feel better. I'm sorry about the London Eye. Don't be ridiculous. We'll do it another time. You're safe. That's all I care about. I told Jane some of what happened. Snippets I could bear to talk about, as she looked on, disgusted at what I was telling her, pausing to shake her head and pat my hand. Let me make you some tea, I said, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Jane had been here hours and had nothing to eat or drink. I'll make it. Jane overtook me on the way to the kitchen. She stayed until late, cooking dinner with what she found at the back of the freezer. You need to go shopping, or rather, Ben does. She laughed at her plate of chips, peas and fish fingers. I pushed mine around my plate as she tucked in. We talked about anything other than my attack, and she tried to keep me distracted, but I was relieved when she left to go home. I loved her and was grateful for her visit, but I was desperate to be alone. The next few days blurred into one. I spent my time sleeping, smoking, staring at the television, and occasionally leaving my room to eat. Ben knocked on the door a few times to make sure I was still alive, offering me tea, cigarettes, and, on one occasion, another joint, all of which were gratefully received. We'd been flatmates for around 2 years. When I first had the flat, I coped on my own for a while, working full-time and supplementing my salary with bar work at the weekends. Then I had to renew my mortgage. The excellent rate I'd secured at first had gone up, and so did my monthly repayments. I got a lodger, a girl called Vicky, but it was a mistake from the outset. I worked in the bar with her, and everyone always came back to ours after closing time. It became a place for partying, and there was always someone lying comatose on the living room floor. One Sunday morning, I woke up to find one of the customers she'd brought back fast asleep at the end of my bed, and the rest of the flat wrecked. When I advertised again, I knew what to avoid. Ben was polite and came across as chilled and easygoing. I didn't foresee him being any problem and thought I'd give living with a man a go this time. It was the best decision I ever made. He paid his rent on time and there were no parties. In fact, if he wasn't working or eating, he spent most of his time out or occasionally playing his Xbox. The bonus was that he worked nights, normally from around 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning. He once told me he was the regional manager for a group of large warehouses in the southeast that contained all sorts of items, from sports cars to designer stock for clothing stores. Items of value that had to be guarded 24 hours a day, and he managed the night team on the ground and any movements of stock. I was impressed. It made my job seem boring, although Debbie and I made sure we'd have a laugh most days, even when we were busy. The day after I made the call to Debbie, I received a bunch of flowers from everyone at work. The delivery man knocked repeatedly, but I couldn't open the door. I felt paralysed by fear. Instead, I hid, hunched in the corner of my room, terrified it was my attacker coming for more. A complete overreaction, I know. The courier left the flowers outside, and Ben noticed them when he left for work in the afternoon. The card read, "Thinking of you." I was touched, but the thought of going into the office made me nauseous. I bet they were talking about me, as well as thinking of me. I was doing everything I could not to think at all. Jane kept in contact every day, checking in to see how I was doing. She sent me a beautiful gift of calming essential oils and pulse point rollerballs and comfy pyjamas, knowing I hadn't got dressed in days. I answered the weekly call from my mother and told her I hadn't been well. I'd been laid up in bed with the flu. She sounded remarkably sober and gave me the recipe for her mum's chicken soup, which apparently was the best cure for flu. Her mood dipped as she told me she'd finally emptied Dad's wardrobe after all this time. I had no energy to talk her out of her melancholy. I felt selfish, as I would usually always try and lift her mood, but I was unable to see past my own darkness. In 4 days, I hadn't left the flat. Ben was doing cigarette and shopping runs, although I lived mostly on pasta, tea and toast. I had no desire to do anything. Chapter 6. Friday, the 29th of September, 2017. On Friday morning, Ben knocked on my bedroom door when he arrived home from work. It was an almighty effort to get out of bed to unlock it, but he was one of the few people I was not averse to seeing. He stood in the doorway, dressed in a shirt and tie, his top button undone. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. His head almost touched the top of the doorframe, but his body didn't fill the width of the space. Hair dark and unruly that he kept short, probably for that reason. He yawned before he spoke. It must have been a long shift. "Hey," he said. "Hey." "How you doing?" He edged forward over the threshold and lowered himself down onto the end of the bed. I shrugged. What could I say? "Jesus Christ, it stinks in here," he chided playfully, surveying the mess of my bedroom. He got up and threw open my curtains, bright sunlight blasting through the glass, making me squint. He opened the window wide, letting fresh, crisp air in before turning to face me, hands resting on his hips. "Eve, we need to talk. I know what happened was dreadful, but this has to stop. You're letting him win if you carry on hiding in here." "Did you bring me cigarettes?" I asked flatly, holding out my hand, ready to receive. Ben's eyes narrowed, and he clenched his jaw repeatedly. "Oh, fuck's sake, no, I didn't." He turned around, his frustration evident, and stomped into his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. I tucked my knees up to my chest and cried. He was right. Of course he was right. What the fuck was I doing? Hadn't washed or changed my clothes since Monday. The bedroom stank of sweat and smoke, the ashtray overflowing and mouldy cups littering the carpet. My reflection was grey and sallow. I resembled a junkie, thin with sunken eyes and greasy hair. I crept back out to Ben's door and tapped gently. A second later it opened, and he frowned at my puffy eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, stepping forward to give me a hug. I scooted backwards, and he looked away, mirroring my step with his own. "I stink, you're right, I need a shower," I said quickly, relieved to see him laugh and the awkwardness dispelled. I didn't want to tell him I couldn't bear his touch. His kindness overwhelmed me, and I didn't know what I would have done without him. But he was still a man, and I didn't want to be touched by one. "I'm scared, Ben," I whispered. "I know." He sighed, and I could see him teetering on the balls of his feet. Was he going to reach out for me again? Thankfully, he decided against it and remained in the doorway. "I'll go get dressed, have something to eat, and once I've had a few hours' kip, we are going out for a walk."